So I suck at cooking, or at least I feel like I do after making this recipe. I made a focaccia steak sandwich with roasted red pepper sauce, and for some reason things were not hitting as hard as I would like them to. I mean, look at my face. That's the face of someone that's not a happy camper. I'm gonna show you how I made this red pepper salsa, seared the steaks, as well as how not to make focaccia. Be prepared to see me rage, and I would love to hear any feedback you have because I desperately need it. At the very least, this is a sign as to why I should test my recipes before filming, but either way, here we go. So this recipe starts the night before. In a large bowl, I'm gonna pour in 1,012 grams of bread flour, followed by 22 grams of sugar. I'm also gonna pour in 810 grams of water and give it a rough mixing with a spatula before using a wet hand to mix thoroughly together. Once fully mixed, I'm gonna place a towel over it and then let it rest for 30 minutes. In the meantime, you're gonna grab a ribeye steak and generously coat it in salt to dry brine uncovered overnight in the fridge. I'm also gonna grab 2 red peppers and slice flat pieces, removing the seeds from it and laying it down on a sheet tray with a generous glug of olive oil. You're going to next throw them in an oven set to broil and broil until the skin is nice and charred. While that's broiling, I'm going to grab 1 large yellow onion or 2 small ones. Don't use 3. I think 3 is a little too much if you have to use the small ones. But I'm going to cut them into chunks and then throw them in a large bowl along with 6 cloves of garlic peeled. Around this time is when I pulled my bell peppers out of the oven, and I'm going to place them in a bowl with some plastic wrap to help steam them for 10 minutes. This will make it easier to peel the skin off later. In our chopped onion and garlic bowl, we're going to pour in a little bit of olive oil, giving it a nice mixing, making sure everything's nice and coated. We're next going to put in 2 to 3 tablespoons of tomato paste, giving it another thorough mixing until everything is lightly coated like so. From there, pour your onion and garlic mixture onto the same sheet tray our bell peppers were on, and then throw them in an oven set to 450 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes. At this point, 30 minutes have passed, so I'm gonna grab our dough and then pour in 9 grams of instant dry yeast, as well as 25 grams of salt and 40 grams of water. Now with a wet hand, I'm gonna mix together our dough until the yeast and water is fully incorporated. It should look something like this, and I'm gonna put a towel over it and let it rest for an additional 30 minutes. From there, I'm going to remove the plastic wrap and carefully remove the skin from our bell peppers. I could have charred them a little bit more to make peeling the skin a little easier, but it wasn't that bad. After 30 minutes, I'm going to perform my first stretch and fold on my dough, which is very easy. Just grab it from one side, pulling it up and over, and doing the same thing to all the sides. Once done, put a damp towel over it and then let it rest for an additional 30 minutes. This is also right when I pulled my onions out of the oven. There are a few charred bits in there, but I'm gonna throw it back in the oven, this time on broil for 2 to 4 minutes just to get a little bit more char. 2 to 4 minutes later, as you can see, there's a bit more char on the onions. I'm next going to grab a medium bowl and throw my bell peppers in it. I'm also going to pour in 1 teaspoon of red pepper flakes and 2 teaspoons of oregano in there, as well as all of our caramelized onions and garlic. I'm going to next grab an immersion blender and give it a blending. No batteries. Okay. So I forgot to charge my immersion blender. I'm gonna grab a food processor instead and throw everything in there, giving it a blending for 30 seconds to a minute. With a spoon, I'll give it a little tasting, and something is very off. But that's because I forgot to add 18 grams of sugar to it as well. I'll give it another blending for an additional 30 seconds to a minute, followed by a tasting, and things are much better now. Oh my God. I also added about half a pinch worth of salt, and now your red pepper sauce is complete. I'm now gonna grab our dough and perform our last stretch and fold for the night. Once completed, I'll seal it up with aluminum foil that's been lightly oiled, and then I'll throw it in the fridge as well to ferment overnight. The next day, as you can see, my dough has not risen much. That is because I never bloomed my yeast, but either way, I'm gonna throw it on a sheet tray that has olive oil on it, and I'll push out the dough as much as I can and then leave it alone to rest for an hour. Now I'm gonna fast forward to 3 hours later, and as you can see, nothing has happened. Again, it's because I used the wrong yeast and I didn't bloom it, but either way, I gave up and decided to move on with it. I'm gonna very pathetically dimple my non-airy dough, and I'll drizzle olive oil over it along with sprinkling some red pepper flakes, chopped rosemary, and flaky salt. Next, I'm gonna throw it into an oven that's been preheated to 500 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes. While that bakes, I'm gonna work on our steaks, and as you can see, they're nice and dry. Plus, they've firmed up and the salt is fully penetrated into the meat. I'm gonna grab a stainless steel pan and bring the heat up all the way to high before pouring in a little bit of vegetable oil to coat the bottom. Once it just starts to smoke, I'll gently lay my steaks into the pan, giving it a hard sear for 1 minute. A minute later, I'm gonna flip my steak and sear the other side for an additional minute as well. Another minute later, I'm gonna flip my steak again and sear the first side one more time for a minute, and then I'll give it one last flip and sear the other side for 30 seconds. The total time I spent searing this steak was 3.5 minutes, and when I checked the temperature, you can see that I'm right around the medium ballpark range, especially after it's rested for 10 minutes. Now 20 minutes have passed, and I'm gonna pull my focaccia out of the oven, and it doesn't look that bad, but things are gonna get way worse. That is because it is fully stuck into the pan. I'm trying my hardest to pry it out, but it would not budge one bit. And I'll tell you this, spending this much time on a loaf of bread just to fail right at the end sucks. I started to get very annoyed, and I tried smacking it out of the pan, thinking that will help, which it did not, which honestly annoyed me even more. So then I tried punching it out of frustration, and then I ended up hurting my hand here. So now my ego and my pride is severely damaged, along with my hand. Either way, I managed to pry out about half of it with my second spatula, though if I'm being honest, this is a pretty pathetic looking focaccia. I'll then slice into my steaks, and I was actually decently surprised on how they turned out. For them being a small steak, I was able to get a nice bit of crust on them, as well as not overcook the center too much. There is a decent bit of a gray band, which I'm not sure is avoidable when cooking out of a pan. The gray band does look pretty substantial, but the steaks are very thin, so it's looking more prominent versus a thicker 2-inch steak. Either way, I'm gonna cut a nice little slice out of my focaccia and put down a layer of steaks onto that piece of bread, followed by a generous dollop of my roasted red pepper sauce covering each piece of steak. I'll then lay down a piece of provolone cheese and lightly melt it with a blowtorch. You can also throw it in the oven on broil for a few seconds to get the same effect. After the cheese is melted, I'm gonna top it with some potato sticks, because why not add a little bit of crunch? And then I'll put my not so beautiful top bun of focaccia on top. I'll split that sucker diagonally with my knife, and as you can see, the cross section honestly looks pretty good. This is how I plated it for the camera, and after giving it a taste, I'm honestly a little conflicted on how I feel about this sandwich. It's definitely good, don't get me wrong, but something was not hitting hard enough. And granted, it could also be that the time I was eating the sandwich, I was not in a good mood at all because of how badly I screwed up my focaccia, but it definitely tasted good. The steak was well seasoned and buttery. The red pepper sauce had a nice depth and acidity to it. The potato sticks added a decent bit of crunch and texture, and the cheese is cheese. Everyone loves cheese. I definitely might be a little too hard on myself, but let me know what you guys think about this meal, and let me know what you think what I did wrong, because I 100% know I did multiple things wrong along this whole process of making this sandwich. Either way, thank you for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.